Chapter 9. Daz let the Wolverine take over. The animal tended to drown out the man's thoughts and he needed the complete abandon of the shift. It worked for a while. He tree jumped through the woods, taking reckless leaps between branches that were almost too far apart. At one point he lost his grip and fell into a camp. His big body took out one pole of the tent when he landed, and the two college students inside mistook him for a black bear because of his size, if the huddling and teeth chattering and screams of "Oh God, a bear" were any indication. And neither Daz nor his Wolverine felt bad about making a show of stomping around the camp. Afterward he gorged on wild berries and chased a few nocturnal animals, but none of his antics worked. He kept thinking of her. It didn't make sense the way everything about Jules burned through his self-control. He'd been in lust with women before. Desire was nothing new. This wasn't that. He'd never felt anything so intense, so overwhelmingly focused to the point it erased all sense of everything else and made him want only one thing: Juliana Perlas. Daz craved her. He needed to be buried bone deep inside her, not just in her body but also inside her heart and mind. And it scared him. That made this situation crazier. Daz had no concept of fear. Nothing had ever scared him. Hurt. That he understood. Pain had been his constant for life. From being left in a trash can by his first mother, to truly getting thrown away by his second mother when she decided she wouldn't raise the wild thing she'd accidentally brought into her home. Only when his mom, Ruth Warren, had come for him, pulling his 3-year-old self into her arms, only then had his pain subsided. But it came back. Pain followed him with little daily reminders he'd been unworthy, caught up to him when he fought other shifters beyond the point of sportsmanship and teetered on deadly. And pain had owned him on the day touch became a form of torture. Through it all, fear hadn't factored into his life. Daz had learned to control himself through every painful event. He'd had to. But somehow Jules unraveled his control. She changed things. Instead of pain, her touch brought a constant stream of pleasure. But the sensation she caused went beyond physical contact. From her laugh, to the sooniness in lying back and talking to her for a while. From the sensual awareness of every move she made all the way to the fact that knowing her made his life better. Jules's presence diverged so far away from pain that Daz had no mechanism to deal with her. That confusion took him wildly out of control, and it scared him. Because the one thing he knew without doubt, had always known, is the pain would return. Life made damn sure he didn't forget it. If fate fucked him over and someday forced him to compare life before Jules to life without her, unlike every other trial in his life, Daz would not survive. Not as the good man he worked so hard to be. That fear drove him deeper into the woods. The wildness of the realization brought out a feral side he hadn't seen in years. The Wolverine hadn't taken over his mind the way he'd hoped his animal side would, and the man wondered if he preferred the pain to the fear. The answer came easily. If he had a chance to choose, he knew exactly which life he wanted, and the fear took over. Again. Jules searched for hours, but her Wolverine eluded her in the darkness of the Carolina night. She went back to her room at Aberdeen Manor and threw herself onto the bed, forgetting about her muddy feet and wet clothes. The tears that followed made her angrier with herself. How could she do that? How could she disrespect Dashiell? She'd ignored his choice and basically sexually assaulted him. No, basically about it, she had assaulted him, and her motives for touching Daz, whether loving or cruel, didn't matter. She'd taken advantage of him, putting her own desires above his. Juliana Perlas, a woman who rescued people who'd been victimized and stripped of their choices, had ignored consent, and that knowledge made her sick. Nausea swirled in the back of her throat, and Jules made a break for the toilet. After emptying her stomach, she rinsed her mouth out and dragged her feet back to the bed. A few minutes later, Gran came in and stroked her hair to comfort her. Cooing a bit, Gran made her sit up so she could toss a cable knit blanket over Jules's still wet and shivering body. And knowing exactly what Jules needed, Gran handed her a mug of hot apple cider. Jules sighed, melting back into her padded headboard. The whirring of a buzzsaw shattered the quiet moment. Jules looked to Gran for an answer. Gran shrugged her thin shoulders. He came back a half hour after you did and went to work on that hole in the house. I took one look at him and came up to check on you. Sliding her feet off the bed, Jules tried to get up to go talk to Daz. Gran grabbed her arm and shook a finger at her, then stroked her head a final time. I think you better take this phone call first. Gran handed over the cordless house phone before leaving the room. Give him some time, she said, closing the door. Jules put the receiver to her ear but stayed quiet. Jules? Jules, talk to me. Lennox. Lenny. Jules broke down completely, her body shaking with shame. She rescued women and sometimes men from abuse every day. How could she do that to a man she cared about? She wanted to say those things to Lennox but couldn't get them out, so her best friend sat and listened to her cry. I'm a fucking predator, Jules finally managed to say. Not true. But I can't argue the points with you if you don't tell me why you think so. I'll tell you tomorrow. Deal. Outside of the thing that broke you down tonight, you okay? Lennox's voice cracked. I kinda need you to tell me the answer is yes. Otherwise I'm on a plane from Sao Paulo right now. Jules loved her best friend so much. Lennox had a way of getting to the root of things and saying what needed to be said. Brazil is too nice to leave so soon, and I kinda need you to talk about mundane things first, she told her friend. I'm not pregnant yet. Jules gripped her mug a little tighter. Lennox paused. Garrett is upset. We've been to the shifter fertilization specialist here. Garrett is okay. I'm okay. So, the doctor can't figure it out. A question came to mind but Jules didn't quite know how to ask it. Something bothered her about Lennox not getting pregnant but exactly what eluded her. I know you want children. You told the world you want fat furry babies at your wedding but why do you say it like that? An edge of tension came through the line. You've always been very good at avoiding the things you don't want to do. Lennox. Her friend made a noise of dissent deep in her throat. I want Garrett's baby. I know you do. Jules sat up straighter in bed. Maybe she could admit what she'd done wrong if she could get Lennox to admit what was going on with her. I want Garrett's baby, Lennox said more emphatically. You've said that. But silence. Is it that you'll have to stop traveling and come home? No, the truth rang in that single word. The life we live. Well, it's not like we have a boss to report to and we have so much money we could travel with the baby for a couple of years. You definitely live the glamorous life. Jules shuddered. I know, right? Lennox pepped up. Did I tell you I met the president the other day? Me, Lennox Averdeen, chilling in my sundress with the president and the first lady. Crazy talk. Oh, she loved my shoes. She's a footwear addict. Like me. Can you believe my life? Although Jules cheered her best friend on, she couldn't fake much enthusiasm for Lennox's lifestyle. It's crazy, she said. It is. Jules could hear the smile in Lennox's voice. And you'd hate it. Jules exhaled. I'd hate it so hard. The paparazzi, people tweeting about you. Speculation about your marriage, observations on how fat you look in that dress. I did not look fat in that dress, Lennox shouted. I looked like a brown, curly-haired Marilyn Monroe. Jules snickered. You are a goddess. Nope, that's you. Lennox sighed. I'm a pin-up girl. I understand my place in the world. Had she mentioned how much she loved Lennox lately? I love you like whoa. Lenny, do you know that? Yup. I mean, who wouldn't? Jules ignored that bit of overconfidence. But I couldn't stand all those eyes on me all the time. It makes me want to hurl just thinking about it. She'd already thrown up once, which reminded her why Gran had wrapped her in a blanket and called Lennox for her. She'd been in the middle of a breakdown. That's why I have to stay away from him. You ready to tell me now? I'm not sure, Jules said. She could hear Lennox purse her lips as she'd sked. Let me help you out. How big is his dick? Lennox. Jules sputtered in her apple cider. What? Is my grandmother with you? No. All right. You know you want to tell me. What's he packing? Big thanks to Gran for calling Lennox. This convo delivered exactly what Jules needed to bring her out of her depression. Jules arched a brow. How big is Garrett's? Well, you know those summer sausages Gran gives us at Christmas? Jules covered her face with the crook of her elbow. That cannot be visualized. I need brain bleach. A scoff from Lennox, a sound Jules knew accompanied a twitchy left eye. Why? Are you acting shy? You've spent your life saying things that make me blush. You once described Adam Cross's junk in such detail I can't eat raw carrots without having someone cut them up for me first. You're fascinated with cocks. Honey. So, tell me about the D lady. Lennox laughed. On any other night Jules would have laughed with her. I can't even think about that, Lennox. Not when I did this awful thing. I got sexually aggressive with him. Jules's voice broke. Fuck. Jules, honey, no. Lennox waited for a beat. Tell me from the beginning so I can help. Shame clogged her throat and Jules choked. She set her mug down on the bedside table before she dropped it, and flipped off the lamp, preferring darkness for confessing. Tears burned the backs of her eyes as she tried to explain why she did what she did before telling Lennox what she'd done. I get confused when he's around. He does something to me. He has this inescapable pull. Cash's brother Dashiell? Lennox asked softly. Yes, that man is everything, Lennox. Do you know what it's like to meet a man, and a week later you're so infatuated with him, it's as if no one else exists? Fabric rustled as Lennox moved. I do. Garrett. He's beyond for me. Yes, Jules said. I don't love Daz. We've just met. But my soul knows I'm going to fall for him. Soon, hard and fast. She dropped her face into both hands. Daz is everything I want and everything I don't. He moves with this grace and power, and although he hides his kindness, he makes my heart stop with the way his whole being comes together. He's beautifully irresistible. Lennox. You're blessed you found him. I don't understand the problem, Jules. Lenny, beyond my objectification of this man, which is vile. Jules took a breath. Dashiell has 1.5 million YouTube followers. When he crashed into your house, he vlogged it. Okay. Well, does he see what you did as harassment? Also, that YouTube thing is not good for you. Of course, crashing into my house isn't good for him either. He definitely took it as harassment. He told me no. I pushed it and he got angry. I don't blame him for that. None of this is good. For him or for me. Jules gulped cider from her mug and put it back on the bedside table. On top of that, he has this weird condition. When people touch him, it hurts. But not with me. I don't bring him physical pain, but the touch thing is the reason he wants me to stay away. I know he's as attracted to me as I am to him. He's just worried our ability to touch won't last and he'll be left more alone than before we met. A quick TSK from Lennox. Like you said, none of this is good for him. Garrett saved me from isolation, and later on his touch started to hurt me. It would destroy me. Jules nodded. Daz feels the same way. We agreed to be friends for those reasons. A nail gun fired pop 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 and echoed through the house. What's that? Lennox asked. Him. Jules shrugged in the darkness. He's probably imagining my face as the target for his nail gun. Tell me what happened. I can't keep my mind or my hands off of him. Jules's head fell back against the headboard and she stared at the ceiling. It's not natural, Lenny. As like our energies are in such opposition that I'm magnetized specifically to him. Jules took a moment to think. I don't touch him on purpose. I touch him like I'm reclaiming a part of myself. Lennox let out a slow sigh. Whoa. I made a promise to be his friend. Then I sexually assaulted him. What? You didn't say you put your hands on him. Lennox seemed to sit straight up. Yes. Hello? Me who rescues abused women. Me who calls herself a feminist. Me who tells young girls they have the right to refuse consent. I took this beautiful man's trust in my offer of friendship and I violated it. Her vision blurred with hot shame. Her friend's voice turned soothing. You've always been a contradiction. Good Catholic versus a cursing banshee, a geek girl who likes to shoot with live ammo rather than in video games. You know what I'm saying, but you're also one to keep your word. Lennox tapped the phone. Ease up on the recriminations. You were reacting to emotions you didn't expect to feel. You were overwhelmed. Jules snapped her fingers to silence both their justifications. That's not an excuse, Lennox. No, Lennox replied, clearly reprimanded. But maybe it's a reason for you to be forgiven. You said he wants you just as badly as you want him. He does. Jules sighed. But not once has he disrespected me. Wow. Jules, even if you can't fix it, you can apologize. Let the man know you respect him and you can be a good friend. Jules banged the back of her head against the headboard. I'm wondering if I Should leave it alone. I'm out of control, Lenny. If he stays angry and I keep my guilt, maybe it'll form a big enough wall between us that we'll leave each other alone. They both sat in silence for a few seconds. Lennox finally said what they were both thinking. I don't know. If your attraction to him is as powerful as you say, I don't think you have any chance of letting him go. And I don't think he's going to let you go either. Chapter 13. After the movie, they wound their way to the Hellion for the ride back to Aberdeen Manor. Daz pulled Jules's hand into his, entwining their fingers in a warm grip. She bumped hips with him to show her pleasure in his gesture. Hopefully, they'd finish the sexing they'd started off so nicely later. They just passed the ice cream shop with Daz slowing down to waggle his brows at her over the spinning ice cream cone flanking the door, when someone called her name. Juliana Vivian Perlas, said a voice dripping with snake oil. Daz's grip on her hand tightened as they caught sight of a shadowy figure ahead of them on the sidewalk. The figure sauntered over, allowing the light of the spinning cone to catch his craggy face. Larkin Grace. If Willie Mae ruled as queen of the Grace family, Larkin stood as the queen's right hand. The town gossip said Stan had beat the shit out of Larkin more than once for infractions against Boer clan rules. But Stan hadn't renounced Larkin like he'd done with his own son, although he seemed to want to. Jules knew this particular Grace seeking her out meant no good. Larkin. Grace, she said. This is Daz Warren, my date. Larkin tapped the side of his nose. I know Daz Warren. I'm a fight fan yet. And still I want to talk to you first. The wiry man crowded their personal space. If he'd meant to intimidate, he picked the wrong couple. They crowded him right back. And they regretted it once they got a whiff of his tobacco-tainted breath. Larkin dipped snuff and the earthiness of the plant permeated his hair, skin and clothes. Daz and Jules held their ground regardless of the stink. You know what I came for, Juliana. You gonna tell me where you took Mariel? And them kids, Larkin said. Since it wasn't a question, Jules didn't answer. You heard me. Jules scrunched her forehead. I heard. Then tell me, Larkin said, leaning against the brick facade of the ice cream shop. Daz couldn't take much more. She doesn't have to tell you shit. That's true, Jules co-signed Daz's dryly delivered refusal. But I will tell you something, Larkin. Jules held the hand Daz had entwined with hers. I can honestly say I have no idea where Mariel and her babies are. Person who picks them up isn't the person who takes them to the safe house. It's a safety mechanism. Lennox calls it the Neo-Underground Railroad. It's a system of getting the abused and oppressed away from the oppressors. The South has a long history of needing a system like that. A puddle of putrid brown splattered the sidewalk where Larkin spat. Then, you'll tell me who I can get the information from. Jules gave him a sunshine smile. Yup, you can get all the information you need from Sheriff Stan the Exterminator. She pulled her phone out of her skirt pocket. I'll call him. Larkin reached out viper fast, snatching the phone from her grasp. Faster, Daz. Took the phone back and handed it to her. Jules beamed at him. He shook his head and winked. Careful. You ain't got your shotgun with you today, Juliana, Larkin said. Back to leaning lazily against the wall. Jules pumped Daz's hand. I think I do. Larkin pushed off the wall. That brings me to my other point. I hear you. Don't fight no more. His glare fell on Daz. That true. I protect what's mine, Daz said. That's all I need to do. Squaring off, Larkin scratched the tip of his nose. I don't know if it is, he said. The way I hear it, you got squeamish when you beat one gal into a wheelchair and tried to send another boy to the cemetery. A jolt of pain flashed through Daz. Jules felt it in her chest and she scanned him with concern. He remained impassive. Larkin spat again. Daz Warren, the Wolverine. Except you ain't really Warren, are ya? The wild boar shifter walked a leisurely half-circle around them, forcing Jules and Daz to rotate to keep him in sight. Now them Warrens is long, lean and pretty as angels. And ain't a single one of 'em a Wolverine. We might not know what they are, but we know you ain't one of 'em. Jules didn't like the slant of Larkin's words. She learned a lot from talking to the people she helped to escape their abusers over the years. One of the things her passengers who'd been adopted hated was having their identity challenged. Many of them struggled with establishing who they were for themselves. They didn't need assholes calling it into question. She stepped up. He's a Warren raised and true. You can ask his brothers when they get into town. Larkin snickered in a wheezing shudder. Nah, that boy there is from another family I know of. They ain't naturally First Nation Americans like them Warrens. They's foreigners and they look just like him. Daz snarled, his shoulders tight. Chee hee hee, Larkin snickered. I knew I had it right. That boy comes from the most violent Wolverine clan around. Out from Louisiana way. Say their name. And all the little animals scatter. Hell, they so vicious we Graces would be proud to call them cousin. The insinuation he'd come from a family vile enough to get Grace approval didn't seem to sit well with Daz. Blue, the hellion is across the street. Go. Get in it. No, she said without looking at him. We stand here together or we ride home together. Go on and get in the car, Juliana. Larkin's tone turned mocking. Your man. Don't want you to know he's a cast-off from the cold-blooded Thalia family. I'm surprised he hasn't ripped out your throat while you slept. Jules decided to end this. Daz wouldn't fight and Larkin wanted one. She didn't get Daz away. He'd end up getting hurt trying to defend them both. Without raising his fists. She had no idea she'd figured wrong. Daz's gloved fist clocked Larkin across the nose with a crack that split the night. Blood spurted and the wiry shifter hit the ground. Daz rolled his neck. Dashiell, Jules cautioned, suppressing the thrill the violence set off in her. You don't fight anymore. The Wolverine took over Daz's voice, infusing it with a feral gruff. That wasn't a fight. That was a takedown. They both watched Larkin, but the wiry man didn't move. You need me to walk you to your car? Daz asked. Jules watched the muscles in his back bunch with tension from behind him. She grabbed his arm. I'm staying with you. Daz stared down at her hands. When his eyes lifted to hers she froze. Glittering liquid black inked the white from his eyes. No, his fangs descended. You're not. Chapter 14. Daz pushed the hellion to its limits. His claws dug into the steering wheel. And he went wild, off-roading in fields of wildflowers and spring clover. He'd wanted to unleash his Wolverine but changed his mind. He and his animal shared the same level of fury and that wouldn't do. Larkin Grace hadn't said anything new. Daz had heard how much he resembled the Thalia family. Hell, he'd seen the resemblance for himself. The same rage that exploded within him was legendary in that family, and the need to dominate stood out as a family trait. But Daz was a Warren to his soul. Whoever his Thalia mother had been, she hadn't wanted him, had thrown him in the trash in case there were doubts about his value. The thing he regretted most wasn't Jules learning about the shithole of a family he'd likely come from. He could deal with that. His loss of control in front of her bothered him most. Tonight she'd seen the dominant alpha who had once needed to make the shifters around him submit. Daz sped up, drifted into a wild curve and repeated the maneuver on the other side of the field. Then he mashed the accelerator, turned the wheel hard and lost control, crashing into a wooden fence and taking a good 100 feet of it out. The demolition didn't slow him down. It fueled his need to break shit, to be that reckless kid who'd loved nothing more than fucking up. Daz rode that way for more than 2 hours until the blue and red flashing lights caught up with him and Sheriff Stan flagged him down. Lucky for Daz, he decided to go crazy in a shifter town. The sheriff understood the boiling blood of the animal inside. The sheriff also promised to punch him in the head if he lost control again. That seemed fair to Daz. And he avoided a night in jail by vowing to fix the fence and pay the owners for their trouble. Worn out and ashamed, he crawled into his bed at Aberdeen Manor 30 minutes later and passed out face first. Daz woke after a few minutes of sleep when his bedroom door swooshed open. Orange blossoms filled his nose and he groaned. Flipping onto his back he waited for Jules. She didn't ask permission. She just climbed into his bed, laid one hand on the crown of his head, and threw the other arm across his bare chest before she snuggled into his side. You thought you'd scared me away, huh? She asked. He relaxed but didn't touch her. Yeah, I did. I'll never be scared of you, Dashiell. I might get pissed but I'm not afraid of you. Okay. He breathed the word out, covering his eyes with his free forearm. You are a Warren, Daz, she said, tapping his chest. I saw you with Cash. You move like they do, get into mischief the way they do, and you're just as beautiful as any one of them. I don't need you to tell me that, Blue. I know what I am, he growled. Okay, she said and stroked his hair, snuggling closer. He kissed her forehead, then threw both arms around her to press her body tight to his. Tell me about it, she asked. The adoption? Yes, please. Which one? Both. Des pulled her on top of him. With her enfolded in his embrace, he opened his legs so her hips lowered to fit against his, resting his chin on top of her head. He reveled in her. Damn, it felt good to be held, to know a woman's touch. Again, this woman's touch. All I know about the first one, which was more foster care than adoption, I suppose, is that they found me at 5 or 6 days old in a trash can behind Belle Star's diner. Belle, the fifth woman with that name in as many generations, took me in and raised me until I was 3. Around that time she realized she brought a wild animal into her home. Jules tilted her head to kiss him under his chin, continuing to place small kisses along his bearded jawline. Since I'd become a rescue animal in her estimation, Belle asked around for help to take me off her hands. I guess I can be thankful for that. Somebody got a message to Ruth Warren, my mother. Daz grinned at the memory of meeting his mom for the first time. He'd recognized her, heart to heart. She said she'd known him for her son right away too. Poor thing had already been infested with that idiot Cash at the time. To Jules he said, my mom says I ran to her and buried my face in her neck. When she asked my name I said, Dazzle. I guess Dashiell was too much for my toddler tongue to manage. He grinned. My dad said he took one look at my Dazzle-whittle face and said, fuck it, he looks like he's mine. Her laughter lifted his spirits. Tentatively she asked, but even though you found your mom and dad, the rejection from Belle still hurt? Yeah, it did, Blue. Still does. I wouldn't trade Ruth and Shayton Warren for any parents on this planet, but rejection at that age clings to you in ways you don't expect. Jules sat up, straddling his chest, gripping his face. Her fingernails scratched through his beard. Then she leaned in, kissing the tip of his nose, his chin, both corners of his mouth. You're a good man, Dashiell Warren, son of Ruth and Shayton. He rested his hands on her hips and gave himself over to her as she stroked and petted him to sleep. The first good sleep he'd had in too many years to count. A presence in the room woke Dashiell up. He didn't move but cradled Jules's still sleeping body and scanned the room for danger. A teenage boy, 14, maybe 15, stood at the bedside. He drank what smelled like ruby red grapefruit juice from a tall cylindrical glass and looked Daz over. Daz had been a shifter his entire life, but he hadn't seen a lot of kids as big as this one. Maybe among the polar bears, but this boy carried wolf like a mantle around his shoulders. His eyes were a shade of brown just short of hazel, and Daz read a bit of Bengali Indian combined with Mediterranean in his features. Who are you? Daz finally asked. The boy sat down on the side of the bed, drank a little more juice and handed the glass off to a groggy but awake Jules. She toasted him with the glass and downed the juice. Let's go here first, the teenager said. I get home from visiting my boy in London and you're in my house sleeping with my auntie, and you smell kinda like a couple. He turned his head completely sideways. Who are you? Whap. The boy caught an umbrella to the back of the head. Knox, Gran said. You shut your pie hole. Knox, of course, otherwise known as Lennox Aberdeen Westlake, the son of Garrett Westlake and stepson of Lennox Aberdeen. Don't hit my head, old woman, Knox said, his chill levels exceedingly high. For a teen. He's sleeping with my auntie Jules. Get him out of here. Does Cash? No. Gran whapped her great-grandson several more times, chasing the boy as he ran around the room. He's Cash's brother, you loon. You get out and go make us breakfast. Knox opened his mouth to protest, but Gran caught him on the side of the head, and he backed out of the room with hand held protectively in front of him. His footsteps made a lot of noise as he took the stairs 2 at a time. Jules put the glass on the side table and said to Daz in her best Susie homemaker voice, Good mornin' and welcome to the House of Aberdeen. Next stop, Insanity. Chapter 18. Cash flew into Lupin's that night. The following morning he helped Daz finish the repairs to Aberdeen Manor, while Garrett watched. Cash assured Daz fixing things wasn't Garrett's strong suit. The movie mogul built things, or he rebuilt them from scratch. He created. He didn't mend. On a break, Garrett made them pancakes and breakfast burritos in the updated 1950s style kitchen, which completely made up for his lack of skill with hammer and nails. Once the plates were passed around, Des got down to the business he'd called the two men in on. He told them about Mariel Grace and her children, Larkin Grace, his own supposed birth family, and the risk of letting the Tavalis anywhere near Lupins. Cash used a rolled-up magazine to smack Daz on the back of the head. His brother got a face full of snarl in return. First off, Cash said, that's for forcing me to explain why my brother is sleeping with my girl to Knox. Cash made a face. Garrett's gaze drifted toward the ceiling. Daz wouldn't get any help there. You said while being all existential. Des curled his shoulders inward with a moony look imitating a hippie, that you'd only been watching out for her. For me in the grand groovy scheme of the universe. He thought about it again. And added, fucking idiot. Cash curled his lips and yelled out, I'm telling Mom you're a motherfucker. Daz threw a clump of scrambled egg at his brother. You go ahead and say motherfucker to Mom and see what Dad does to you. He stood up to retrieve the egg, but Cash snatched it up off the counter and ate it. It didn't make sense how easily Cash made him act like a kid, but he did. Daz flipped him a look of disgust. Did I mention idiot is actually stamped on your birth certificate? Blue as mine. Get over it. It wasn't until Daz had scraped his plate into the trash can and sat back down at one of the bar stools at the kitchen island that he noticed the smug look on his brother's face and the you think he's an idiot look on Garrett's. Garrett exhaled. I don't have the patience for this. You too sure you can? Refrain from brotherly asshattery. Cash stretched his legs out. Now that he's admitted his feelings, he smirked at Daz. You repressed bastard, we can get back to working out this problem. He pondered for a moment. I could take Larkin out somewhere and kill him in boar form. Then we could barbecue him North Carolina pit style and feed him to the rest of the Graces. Daz glanced at Garrett, who was pinching the bridge of his nose in a silent plea for patience. And you think I'm an idiot for thinking he's an idiot? Daz asked. My wife isn't going to like it if I run around killing people and turning their relatives into cannibals. I'm not all that into the idea of killing people as it is, Garrett said. He looked to Daz for his take. Daz shrugged. We all know I've got an aversion to hurting anyone. I still feel guilty about breaking the bastard's nose. He paused. But I mostly say that to cover up the fact I'm afraid Jules will beat my ass. He shivered for effect. True enough, Garrett said. Any other ideas, Cash? I said I would do the killing, Cash said. Yeesh. Daz, are you going to tell Jules about this? Of course I'm going to tell her. Daz said. My ass does not require shotgun pellet ventilation. It's just that she's not a shifter, despite having it in her genes. I think I should bring her a solution along with the problem. Let's go over to the gray spread and have a talk with Larkin, Garrett said. Maybe we can work something out. Daz smoothed his beard. It's not a bad idea, but you know that idiot over there, he pointed to Cash, is going to punch somebody in the head. Possibly. Twice. Garrett nodded. Yeah, but it worked out the last time. It'll be fine. Famous last words. Daz knew it when Garrett said them. He thought about that again 3 hours later when they all landed in jail. Garrett covered his head when they heard the stampede and lamentations of their women. And by lamentations, Daz meant their ladies bemoaning how they'd chosen such stupid men for their own. The women also weren't happy about getting called down to the police station on a Saturday. They'd been having a girls' day. Daz had warned Garrett his brother would punch someone. They hadn't imagined he'd flatten 3 Grace men including Larkin, along with an actual wild boar. The Graces kept as a pet. Every time Garrett said, you punched a pig, Cash responded with, I didn't know. Punching is my affliction. I couldn't stop. Doubling their trouble, a group of Grace women showed up right behind Lennox, Gran, Jules and Knox, who they tease about being one of the ladies later. Willie Mae, Effie and Caitlin Grace stood with stocky arms crossed or hands on hips, glaring at their own men. Sheriff Stan didn't stand a chance once the women converged on him despite the fact they all, with the exception of Gran, clearly saw him as a father figure. Anderson Garrett Westlake, Lennox said, while Knox laughed at his father. What did you do? Yup, Willie Mae said. I want to hear this too. Garrett looked genuinely bewildered by Willie Mae. I don't report to you. Don't report to anybody. Lennox cleared her throat and Garrett started explaining. It started when Daz called me and Cash in for a meeting. Jules's jaw tightened. Daz held his hands up for protection, not trusting the bars to keep Juliana away from him. Now Blue, it actually started when Larkin came by the clock tower. All 6 angry women turned their glares on Larkin Grace. Garrett slipped as a fist bump. Willie Mae, a surprisingly short woman when compared to the size of her animal, thumped one of the bars, making it ring. She had peroxide blonde hair, drawn-on eyebrows and tan skin stretched over a body shaped like a V. Daz understood why she'd become head of the Grace family and not Larkin. She wasn't someone you mess with more than once. Larkin, she said in a tobacco-roughened voice. I know it weren't you starting trouble. For the first time Larkin looked twitchy. Torrentini, that Cash Warren, punched a bunch of us in the head, including May Ella. Larkin got animated, jumping up from the bench in the Grace holding cell to glower into the Warren/Westlake one. Now you tell me, Willie Mae, who punches a defenseless? So, that's what I want to know, Garrett said. Cash looked affronted. We were having a good old-fashioned normal brawl until Garrett shifted. A prehistoric wolf the size of a grizzly will bring any situation to a head. No one could argue with that. Lennox looked ready to faint and Garrett looked pitiful. Nothing like seeing a 6.5-foot man brought to his knees by his woman's fears to bring Garrett's compulsive need to shift into clarity. Jules's voice broke through the murmurs of agreement about the wolf. Cassius. Warren. Oh, if no one shifted until Garrett did, why did you punch that poor pig? Boar, several Graces shouted. And it all started up again, each faction fighting to have their side of the story heard, until an air horn pierced the clamor. Sheriff Stan blew the horn again to make sure they were listening. Shut up. I'm going to hear from Dashiell Warren, and then I'll decide whether to listen to the rest of you. Daz laid out all the facts of Larkin's 2 visits to see him, including the suspicion Daz was blood related to the Thalia crime family. When he finished, Cash said, that's why we went to their chop shop, to try to talk things out. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Willie Mae waved her arms at Cash. Sheriff Stan's brow furrowed. His expression a bit like a bug had flown up his nose. Now Stanley Hewitt, Willie Mae said. You know chop shop is slang for garage, right? She turned to her family. Right, everyone? Daz saw it the minute the light bulb went off in Jules's head. Stan, she said, why don't the ladies and I take an interrogation room and work this out? You can keep all our men for the night. The increasingly more impressive Willie Mae said. I'm all right with that. Sheriff Stan liked the sound of it too, which bothered Daz a lot. With a bargain struck, Jules and the rest of the ladies left to go find a room. Jules and the Westlake/Averdeens took one side of the interrogation table and the Graces sat on the other. Let's get this thing worked out before the sheriff gets wise and I have to close down more criminal endeavors beyond my chop shop, Willie Mae said. As the alpha female, Lennox spoke first. We'll start with the catalyst to this whole thing. Let Mariel and the kids go. We'll pay for the whole Jules put in Kirby's ceiling. That ain't no trade, Willie Mae said. I'm not offering a trade. Lennox sat back in her chair. Jules jumped in. We're speaking to you woman to woman. Lennox finished for her. You had to know what your brother was doing. Willie Mae worked her jaw as she thought it through. The thing is, the way my brother treated Mariel ain't no different from how I was raised. Effian. Caitlin agreed. That's how we was all raised. My daddy said a man ain't loving a woman right unless he smacks her around. The Graces saw the shock on Jules, Lennox and Grant's faces. These women were victims of generational abuse to the point it reprogrammed them, changed their idea of what love looked like. That shouldn't have happened, Knox said in the quiet. Well boy, Willie Mae leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. You might be right. What else is on your mind, Lennox? You'll leave Juliana alone. Willie Mae sucked her teeth. I never meant Juliana Perlas no harm. She shook her head, lifting turquoise-painted fingernails to examine. You tried to ram my truck, Jules said. Lennox cleared her throat. Jules amended with a thumb point. Her truck. Here's the thing, Juliana, Willie Mae said. I'm sorry for losing it on you. But you come home for a visit to find your little brother crying because some bitch with a shotgun threatened him and took his family. Then tell me what you'd done. I'd have lost my shit, Jules replied. Willie Mae inclined her head with a quick nod of agreement. I really didn't Think what Kirby put Mariel through was that bad. Willie Mae looked up at her cousins who'd crowded in behind her. Her voice hollowed out when she said, I thought most women got hit at home. Shit, I've been known to slap my man in the mouth when he fries my nerves. Nothing else needed to be said. You didn't call into question someone's worldview and then pick at her while she tried to figure things out. Jules wouldn't let this go though. She planned to continue working on the Grace women until they realized domestic violence wasn't a way of life. After a silence that seemed to make Knox jumpy, Willie Mae said, What do we know about this Thalia family? Effie pulled out her tablet. Jules made a show of doing a search on her phone, but she'd already done the research. Effie spoke first. They're an international crime family with roots back to Iran. They outmuscle and out-money us by a long haul. Jules didn't like hearing what she'd learned any better than she liked saying. They're known to be responsible for the eradication of several rival lines of shifters, including other Wolverines. They've been Americans for several generations, and it's thought their ancestor became a shifter when he arrived in Louisiana a few hundred years ago through the ritual of tooth and claw. A bite and a scratch from the same shifter turn most humans into the same animal as their progenitor. Jules learned about tooth and claw when Lennox had faced off against 3 she-wolves. She scrolled down the Thalia wiki page. They're also known for being violent and cruel, and death seems to follow them. Effie took over again. Over the past 4 years, Thalia, the family patriarch, has lost his son and 2 of his grandsons to their criminal activities. Some folks speculate he's looking for a new heir. Lennox caught Willie Mae's eye. They communicated without words. We won't chase Mariel, and I can order Larkin to quit. Under most circumstances he'd listen, but if he thinks he's doing something to help the family he might go against me. Can we reason with him? Lennox asked. All 3 Grace women laughed. Caitlin said, My brother ain't but so smart, but I'll try to show him the pros and the cons. The women ended their meeting. On any other day Jules would have been proud about what they'd accomplished without her having to fire her shotgun. But not today. If Daz thought his presence could bring a criminal syndicate to Lupin's, he'd leave town and she'd lose him. Chapter 19. Jules got a text from Daz after he got out of lockup the next morning. Daz, take me to church. Jules, really? Daz, yeah, meet me there? As she walked up to the cathedral, she found Daz standing on the church steps, wearing a dark suit, the same color as his eyes, and a light blue shirt he'd left unbuttoned at the collar. He looked amazing, but beyond that he'd become the man she wanted to meet every Sunday morning, for the rest of their lives, on the cathedral steps. He kissed the corner of her mouth when she reached him. He took in her marigold yellow sundress and said, You're beautiful, baby blue, with a certain gleam in his eye. She couldn't help the warmth his comment brought. Playing coy, she turned on her fuchsia heels, pretending to be unaffected until she heard his deep-chested chuckle behind her. She turned back toward him and he grabbed her into his arms, kissing her breathless. You keep kissing me like that and we may not make it inside, she joked. I do love the way your mind works. Des took her hand and they walked inside. Later, while they ate a classic banana split at the ice cream shop, he told her how much he enjoyed church with her that morning, admitting how glad he was that she took him seriously enough to share her spiritual side with him. His sensitivity made her tremble. Despite his bad boy ways, Daz was a caring man. A tiny quake shook Jules's heart at the revelation. She would take him to church next Sunday and she'd hold his hand during the mass as she'd done earlier that day. Like Lennox said, finding a man like Daz was a blessing. In that moment Jules knew she loved Dashiell Warren. She loved the danger boy he showed everyone else, and the sweet man he gave only to her. She craved the sexual adventures he took her on, as much as she needed those moments cuddled on his lap while he read to her. There were so many ways she could lose him. His birth family could pull him away because he'd protect the town before he'd allow his past to harm them. Their ability to touch could evaporate and create a wall between them. He wouldn't stay if that happened because he'd want her to have a life with a man who could give her all the caresses and hand-holding they currently shared. His growing popularity could freak her out and send her scurrying back behind the scenes. So many ways to lose him. Only one way to keep him. She'd hold on with both hands for as long as she could. That evening a growing crowd of Daz Days fans from in and out of town Louise Dumbarton, Pa Bailey, Chaplin, Cash and Jules waited in front of the clock tower. Most importantly, Jeff Jacobs stood behind Chaplin's chair, talking to him about things only former loves knew. Jules felt badly for them. The two men had found a sweet friendship, but their platonic bond seemed to make the ache of what they could have had sharpen into a cutting edge. Daz had disappeared inside, while they watched the hour and minute hands wound round and round to land on 8 p.m., and for the first time in 10 years the bell rang out 8 times. The audience went crazy. Jeff Jacobs kissed Chaplin's cheek and the younger Bailey oscillated so hard in his chair. Jules worried he'd fall out. Louise held a cocktail party on library grounds afterward. Jules rewarded Daz with a ton of kisses all over his face. Then she played the role of surrogate and hugged him or patted his back for folks who couldn't do it for themselves. Jules was feeding muscadine grapes to Daz one at a time when the flashes of several camera phones went off in their faces. "I knew it was you," said one tall, gorgeous woman with pale blue hair and paler skin. "You all recognize her, right?" she asked her friends. "First Adam Cross and now our Daz Warren." The woman's tone turned incredulous. "This bitch needs to be stopped." Chapter 20. Jules woke up the next morning and nothing happened. The crazed fans who'd terrorized her 6 years ago hadn't followed her home, or thrown any bricks through her windows. A quick check in the mirror showed how perfectly her melon-colored dress highlighted her skin. She kissed Daz's sleeping face. He'd been amazing the night before, letting his obsessed fan know she could respect Jules or leave. Jules gave him lots of rewards for that when they got back to Aberdeen Manor. Jules went downstairs to have breakfast with Lennox and Gran on the back porch and nothing happened. She drove her car to work. When she got there she spoke to the staff and got them ready just in case her infamy brought problems to the diner. But they had a good day at the Peach Pit. The diner stayed as busy and full as usual. Their only rowdy patron turned out to be Dylan, who decided to fire up the jukebox and break into a bad falsetto version of Queen's Somebody to Love. The main problem there was most women had trouble reaching the stratospheric notes of Freddie Mercury. Dylan needed a 40-foot ladder and the Starship Enterprise to get halfway to those octaves. But Dylan made them all laugh in the attempt, and for Jules his singing counted as blessedly uneventful. After work she said hello and goodbye to the second shift, filled a bag with freshly baked biscuits for Daz's breakfast, and stepped out into the sunshine. Still nothing. Still a nice day. But when Jules got to her car she found a message on her windshield. Not in the form of a note tucked under the wiper, but in huge neon green letters painted across her windshield. "Starslut will fuck for fame." Jules hadn't quite gotten over the shock when a cold stream of water hit her back. She turned around and another blast covered her front with a liquid she realized wasn't water. It reeked of bleach. The tall, pale, blue-haired woman, who Daz had told her went by the name Mazzy Kitts, obviously fake, stood with a smaller, darker girl with a mohawk and lip piercings. Both held super soakers filled with bleach, the scent of which burned Jules's nostrils. Her lovely little dress was ruined. It took Jules a minute to realize these chicks truly had sprayed her with chemicals and written "Starslut" on her windshield, but the message reached her brain soon enough. In the meantime, Mazzy and Mohawk had stopped shooting and were pointing and laughing. Reaching into the bag she brought with her, Jules pulled out a buttery soft biscuit and opened fire. Pow! Hot biscuit hit Mazzy in the eye and stuck. Pow! Mohawk took a biscuit to the forehead and squeaked. Pow pow! Biscuits caught Mazzy in the chest as she screamed. Bip! Another flaky missile caught Mohawk on the side of the head as she turned to run. Then Jules remembered something very important. She had a shotgun filled with rock salt in her trunk. She dropped the biscuits, popped her trunk and went for her weapon. "Oh, okay bitches. It's on now." Jules cocked her shotgun with one hand. It wasn't an exaggeration to say she'd never seen anyone run that fast. Run? Like a girl? Hell yeah, most shifters wished they could match the speeds at which Mohawk and Mazzy got out of there. Jules laughed with maniacal glee. "Run. Keep going. I'm the sheriff in this motherfucking town." Jules yelled at their backs. "Nope, I don't believe you are," a voice said behind her. She whirled around, ready to go to battle. "But the sheriff of this here motherfucking town sure is proud of you." Without a care about the bleached sheriff stand, the exterminator smashed Jules to his potbelly. She hugged him back, happy he'd shown up for her. Let me be clear, if my Cora or anybody else asks, I'm proud of you for not shooting those girls, Stan said, holding on to Jules. But we both know the truth. Stan drove her to Aberdeen Manor. While they sat out front, he promised he'd have her car towed and cleaned, then hugged her once more before she got out. Jules gladly accepted the reprieve from the damage those heinous chicks had done to her sense of safety. Halfway up the front steps she paused. With so many super sniffers in the house, she'd cause an uproar the minute she walked in with the reek of bleach clinging to her. Fishing her phone out of her handbag, she texted Knox. Jules, bring me a change of clothes to the backyard. Knox, why? Completely engrossed in texting, she headed around the side of the house. Jules, just do it. Walking around back now. Jules mumbled a stream of curses about silly-ass stepnephews and marched directly into the Aberdeen Manor family having a backyard picnic. Garrett, Cash and Dylan sniffed the air. All four turned to stare at her in unison. Feeling exposed, Jules jumped at the chance to collect her thoughts. When a notification buzzed on her phone. Knox, we're back here already. She blinked at the screen, then turned the same angry glare on Knox. Her thumbs flew over the keypad. Jules, are you serious? The men converged on her and the women followed. The noise and the bleach made her feel a bit lightheaded. Daz came to stand beside her and entwined his fingers with hers. His presence at her side made her feel a bit stronger, and she answered the barrage of questions one at a time. What happened? You okay? Lennox said. What direction did they run in? Garrett asked. Is Stanley Hewitt going to arrest those bitches? Gran piped in. Or am I going to have to break out an ass whipping? On and on the questions kept coming. Jules wanted to assure everyone it'd all be fine, but she didn't feel up to it. And she couldn't take the fumes wafting from her bleach-soaked dress much longer either. Daz, who hadn't gotten to speak a word, held up his first two fingers and the thumb of his right hand. His gesture demanded and received silence. Then he scooped Jules up and carried her upstairs to her room. Once he'd kicked her door closed with his foot, he took her into the bathroom and stood her in the middle of it. Kneeling in front of her, he placed her hands on his shoulders and took off her shoes one at a time. She leaned on him while he did it. That done, he gently walked a small semicircle around her to unzip her dress. Sliding it off her shoulders, he let the bleached fabric fall to the floor. His big strong arms wrapped around her middle and pulled her tightly to his chest. He kissed her hair and whispered comforting words to her for several minutes. With a final kiss and squeeze, Daz walked over to the tub and filled it. In the cabinet under the sink, he found her citrus and cinnamon bath salts and put them to good use. The salt dissolved into the bath water and filled the room with her favorite scent. It didn't take Daz long to strip her, lift her and lower her into the tub. He filled his hands with her hair and kissed her forehead once more before he left the room, quietly closing the door behind him. Jules sighed as she slid down into the water until it lapped her chin. The bathroom door opened again. This time Daz held her iPod. Cowboy Bebop, Justice League Unlimited, or Naruto Shippuden? He asked. Why are you so perfect? She moaned, completely dunking her head underwater and coming back up. Daz didn't say another word. He preferred not to answer. When she asked rhetorical questions about his amazingness, he only waited for her response. Cowboy Bebop and another kiss? She got both. She spent the rest of the night as far away from her problems as Daz could take her. Jules began to realize that no distance was too far when he was taking her there, and she fell in love with him all over again. The next day only one thing went right, and that was Daz. Jules and Lennox drove into the Peach Pit together, and he walked in a few minutes later. He took a seat at a back booth and kept watch over her. Jules kept him fed and covered in kisses as he watched her back. Out in front of the diner, a bunch of Daz Days fans held an all-day protest against gold diggers. They were smart enough not to make threats, but they made sure Jules knew they didn't approve of her or her money-hungry ways. And the theme song of the day, Kanye's Gold Digger, played over and over from phones and wireless speakers. For reasons she couldn't explain, Jules kept leaving the office to see if her anti-fans had moved on. Stress began to form a ball of anxiety in her chest. The longer the protesters stayed, the more the anxiety expanded, and the more it hurt. Even Stan or his deputies stopping by once per hour didn't ease Jules's distress. On one visit to the front she felt a tug on her hand. Des tugged her onto a bar stool. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks and then her mouth. Lennox said, "I can take you home whether you want to go or not," he said, his assessing gaze intense. "You going to argue with us?" She shook her head emphatically. She'd had enough of this shit 6 years ago. This time around was overkill and Jules wanted the problem gone. "Wait for me," Des said. Then he went outside and said hello to his fans. Jules hadn't noticed Lennox had sat down on the bar stool next to her until her best friend got up and went to the window. She immediately beckoned Jules over. Hesitant but trusting Lennox's judgment, Jules walked over. The fans, both female and male, crowded Des into their center. They were careful not to touch him, but if he'd been made of glass their breaths would've fogged him up. Funny how they could be so precious with their idol and so cruel to anyone who upset their crowd sensibilities. Des said hello to several of them, staring them each in the face for longer than necessary. They asked him questions and snapped selfies with him in frame. While Des took out his phone. "What's your name?" he asked a slender brunette guy with a pouty mouth. "Kinnan. I'm Killa on your channel and stuff," Pouty Mouth said, shooting a smug look at his friends. Des scrolled on his phone. "I found you, Killa," Pouty Mouth squealed. Des looked him in the eye, lifted his index finger high above his phone and let it descend like a detonator. "Blocked," Des said with a glittering coldness in his gaze. Pouty Mouth gaped and Des moved on. "What's your name?" The girl in question was so shocked she didn't have the sense to lie. Trouble. She seemed uncertain. Jules had to admit if Des looked at her with such cold disdain she'd have broken too. "Blocked." Des looked around. Every fan his eyes fell on found a reason to evacuate, some with apologies, others begging for forgiveness. Des cleared the protesters so fast it made Lennox applaud and jump up and down in the window. Lennox mimicked Yoda, her syntax going completely out of whack. "Well, you did, young Jedi. Pleased with your choice am I." Jules agreed. She'd chosen very well. Choice might not have been the correct word since she couldn't stay away from Des, not with a need that bordered on addiction, but she'd go with choice. But as happy as she was in this moment, one thing worried her. How long could Des choose her before he had to give up the fans that made him so happy? She didn't want to take away the things he enjoyed. Des needed the spotlight. He needed to shine. Jules wouldn't allow herself to become a black hole that swallowed his light. Chapter 25. On his last morning in town, Des sat down with Pa Bailey and Chaplin for tea. Des's imminent departure had agitated Pa. He kept mumbling, "Folks just up and disappear right when you're getting attached to them." Des cared a lot about the father and son too. That's why relief flooded him. When the bell over the door jingled and Jeff Jacobs walked in, his manner officious until he looked at Chaplin. Jeff kissed the excitedly oscillating younger Bailey on the cheek, then sat down on the wooden edge of the widow display. It had taken a few days, not to mention a sedative or two, but Chaplin had gotten over the clock tower breakdown. Old dreams were the hardest to let go of, and dreams tied to love lingered. For Chaplin, fixing the clock meant bridging the divide fate had cut between the two men. But Chaplin had somehow made his peace. Having Jeff come around often probably didn't hurt things either. Jeff shared just enough kindness with Chaplin to show he cared, but not enough to mislead the other man. Thankfully that friendship seemed to soothe the unfulfilled space in Chaplin. Maybe it'd be enough for him. Soon enough. Jeff would have to confess he'd fallen for a guy so similar to Chaplin it would burn. Des had a strong feeling his friend could handle it though. Just like his pa, Chaplin Bailey had been built unbreakable. Des watched Chaplin watch Jeff drink his tea, then lowered his gaze to his own cup. Amazing how both Pa and Jeff thought Chaplin was oblivious about Jeff's love life. Des hadn't known Chaplin before the fall, but he knew without doubts the man had always been observant. Then and now. Feeling eyes on him, Des glanced up at his friend. Something in Chaplin's gaze said, "Yeah, I'll be all right." Lifting his cup in a toast, Des bowed his head and Chaplin returned the gesture. The good feelings of reuniting the two men by fixing the clock tower didn't eclipse the guilt of the clockwork breaking down for a second time. Des vowed to find a way to make it ring again. He wanted to help give that closure to Chaplin. No, Chaplin didn't need it. Des wanted closure for himself. The four men sipped their tea. Chaplin drank his through an attachment to his chair and a straw. Pa Bailey put down his gilded porcelain teacup and said, "I bet there are Grand Dukes in England who've got nothing on we four gents." Chaplin's neck rolled in agreement. "What time do you head out?" Jeff asked in his "I'm a lawyer thus my questions must be answered" tone. Daz had a high resistance to doing what people wanted him to do, especially when he'd been about to say goodbye on his own. He was perverse that way. Sue him. He didn't say those words out loud though, mostly because Jeff Jacobs probably would sue him. "I'm ready to say my goodbyes," Daz said, standing. Pa Bailey hugged him, his frail-looking but strong hands pounding Daz's back. Daz bore the pain. He'd worn his gloves and long sleeves in preparation for this moment. With a smile, he gave Chaplin a fist bump. Then he turned to Jeff, who didn't offer his hand. Despite his fastidious exterior, Jeff had a kindness deep inside that radiated out. "Thanks, man," Daz said. "I'll take care of them." Jeff squeezed Chaplin's shoulder. "I'm good at taking care of people." Daz nodded, quickly leaving the hardware store so his emotions wouldn't give him away. About an hour later he stood on the front porch of Aberdeen Manor. To the edge of the lawn, his Thalia cousin Turaj waited for him to say his goodbyes. Daz planned to follow Turaj to Louisiana in the Hellion. Cash, who stood on the porch, stepped down and handed Daz his duffel. "It's idiotic for you to go down there where you don't know anyone. Let me come with you." No, Daz didn't want his little brother caught up with the infamous crime family. He refused to drag any of his loved ones into his mess. He'd already decided to cut off all communications with his family and his blue until he came back. If he came back, what do I tell our parents? Cash flexed his hands into fists. Daz cupped his brother's neck, the ache in his skin deadened by his gloves. The other ache he could do nothing about. "Tell them I'm okay." "How am I supposed to know that?" Cash pulled away. "Call when you get there." Daz didn't answer. Gran, Garrett, Knox, Lennox, and Dylan had all wished him the best. While they did, Jules remained silent. When he walked over to where she stood on the front lawn, she allowed him to pull her in for a kiss. "Let Cash go with you," she said. Her eyes pleaded with him. "No," he said. "I don't want any of you around those people. I don't know who they are." Jules let her forehead fall against his chest. Daz knew he had to leave now. One more minute with her and he'd change his mind. And at some point he'd regret it. His rage would make him sorry he hadn't been strong enough to do right by her. One last kiss and he walked out to the Hellion and threw his gear onto the passenger seat. Turaj came to stand beside him, scanning the people of the porch. "I'd have a hard time leaving them too," Turaj said. His cousin's gaze rested on Jules and Daz bristled. "I think your woman hates me." "My woman and I are a lot alike," Daz replied, getting inside the Hellion and putting on his helmet. Turaj laughed. Nothing offended this guy. Daz had tried, and Daz could be pretty fucking offensive when he tried. "Lead on, cousin," he said, pointing at the road ahead. Turaj got into his 2015 Dodge Viper. Daz cranked up the Hellion. Jules hopped down the stairs, jogging toward him. He couldn't stay. He couldn't. Daz pulled out, knowing his cousin would take the lead at some point. In his rear view, Jules stood on the side of the road, her romper pressed to her body by the breeze. He'd never seen a more beautiful or sad image. Only a fool like him could leave his goddess behind. Jules watched the Hellion disappear. Her throat constricted, her knees weakened, and she dropped to the ground. She was just so overheated and so thirsty. Lennox and Dylan reached her first. Lennox sat behind her, holding her up. Dylan pressed the backs of his fingers to her neck, checking her temperature. "She's got a nasty fever," he said. "How do you feel, Juliana?" "Sick," she said. But she kept her heartbreak. Chapter 26. 7 months later. 213 days of illness really brought a girl down. Jules had dealt with varying degrees of fever and body aches for 7 months. Some days she functioned better than others. Some days she curled into a ball, unable to move without her body cramping. Other days were similar to having the flu. Mostly it felt like the worst menstrual cramps known to womankind combined with raging hot flashes. And she never got better. Dylan ran tests for infectious disease. No. Pregnancy. Negative. Viral or fungal infections. Nada. Genetic conditions. Nah. Allergies and parasites. Her favorite Dr. Dude hadn't figured out what kept making her sick. Gran suggested a broken heart and Dylan shook his head and said, "She's got that too." "Jules, are you feeling up to eating today?" Lennox asked from the kitchen. On her bad days, Jules liked to curl up on the banquette in the breakfast nook and listen to music while Lennox cooked. Somehow being close to Lennox and Gran lessened her fevers and the cramping. No, Jules rubbed her chin against the knit throw covering her from toes to neck. "It's one of the bad days." "The full body cramps?" Lennox came over to peer over the breakfast table at her. "Not if I don't move." Leaning over Jules, Lennox touched her neck with light fingers. "This has to stop, Juliana. It doesn't make sense." "I know." Jules gritted her teeth as a particularly bad cramp convulsed in her chest. Lennox disappeared and returned with a small cup. "Open," she said. Jules obeyed and Lennox placed an ice chip on her tongue. While it melted, Lennox sat in one of the chairs. Jules opened her mouth and Lennox gave her another ice chip. "You don't think this is something supernatural? Maybe it has something to do with Daz, honey." "Don't, Lenny." Jules held up a hand and gritted through another cramp, this one accompanied by a wave of nausea. Her hand dropped. "I'd forgotten about him for 10 whole minutes. I don't get many reprieves that long." She missed Daz with an ache that rivaled her sickness. Every morning when she woke up and looked at the empty spot beside her, she thought, maybe today he'll come home. He never did. His absence had hollowed her out. She'd become a pretty shell, like the largest nesting doll if you removed all the smaller ones. It looked fine until you picked it up and realized it was empty. Jules could accept the painful fevers of her medical condition. She'd take double if someone could take away the everyday heartache of losing Daz. She missed his voice when he read to her, the feel of his fingers on her cheeks. She craved him, his smart mouth, his kind heart. She wanted him back. How badly had she fucked up that she wasn't allowed to be happy? Why couldn't she have her man back? Reality crowded in on her thoughts. Dashiell hadn't answered a single call or text from any of them. Not from his parents, his brothers, or Jules. He'd cut them all off. They didn't know if the Tavalis had killed him, or if he'd become someone else in the process of getting to know his real family. Jules took a deep breath. If one of those two things turned out to be true, Jules hoped for the latter. She could deal with him choosing another life, but the thought of someone hurting him or of him dead destroyed something inside her. Daz had to be alive. "I keep calling and texting him, but he doesn't answer." The twitch of annoyance winked under Lennox's left eye. "Leave it alone." Another ice chip, another question, this one from Jules. "Have you talked to Garrett yet?" Another ice chip. "No." Lennox fluffed her curls. "Can we leave that subject alone too?" "No," Jules said. "Do you not understand how dangerous what you're doing is? You've let it go on for too long, Lenny. Tell that man you're on birth control. Not because you don't want his children, but because you need counseling." "I'm not crazy, Jules." Lennox left the table. "Not because you're scared. But you're crazy as fuck if you think your marriage isn't in trouble. Garrett has been so good about catering to your fears. He keeps half of himself hidden for you. What are you doing, Lennox?" The worst cramp of the day clamped down on Jules from her shoulders to her abdomen. "Ugh," she cried out. Lennox went into the cabinets. Jules heard the maraca sound of the pills shaking in their bottle before Lennox brought them over. Shaking 2 painkillers out, her best friend held the medicine up to her. But something strange happened. The fever she'd carried around with her for 7 months began to subside. One moment she had the chills, the next nothing. Jules grabbed Lennox by the wrist, knocking the pills to the floor. "Something's happening." The perplexed look her friend gave her would have been comical if Jules hadn't been in shock. That's when the front door swung open and the voice Jules desperately needed to hear called out, "Blue." Jules froze. "Lenny, am I hallucinating or did you hear that too?" Lennox leaned to look into the foyer. "We're in the kitchen," she called out. The wild tingle of excitement nearly made Jules bounce off the banquette, and then he was in the room, filling it with his powerhouse energy. The bond between them snapped back into place. Jules stood to take a step and stumbled on a chair leg. Daz crossed the room in a millisecond, his arms closing around her before she fell. He looked good. His dark gray eyes were filled with mirth and a different shade of confidence than the bad boy swagger of 7 months ago. The V in his long-sleeve black t-shirt drew her eyes to the masculine hardness of his chest. She licked her lips. Her fingers stroked over the clean, perfectly groomed hairs of his short beard. Daz rumbled almost in a purr and rolled his face into her hand to kiss her fingers. And Jules realized she hadn't had a single cramp since he'd caught her. All the months of pain and fever were suddenly gone. She went limp against him, even though she felt strong again for the first time in a long while. "I'm home, baby blue," Des said against her cheek. He kissed her tenderly and sweetly, and she melted. When he lifted his head to lock gazes with her, she saw the moment their explosive connection kindled in the depths of his eyes. "Can I take you to bed?" he asked. Jules started to shake her head no, but ended up shaking it yes. Des had no idea she'd been sick for so long, and honestly she wasn't sick anymore. Didn't make sense, but nothing between her and Dashiell Warren ever had. From moment to moment they leaped from one intensity to another. Right now Jules definitely wasn't sick, but she was horny. "Take me to bed," she kissed Daz, breathless. "Wait," Lennox said, as Daz scooped her up and started for the stairs. "Later, Lenny," Jules called back. "Kill him later." Daz chuckled, but he had no idea how serious she and Lennox were. She didn't have time to explain it now. She wanted him inside her. She wanted to scream, while he pounded her so good she'd fall into a deep comatose-like sleep for the rest of the night. And that's exactly what he did. He blew her mind. Before morning they'd had sex in so many positions both her thighs and her mouth were sore. Then momentary coma descended, and she slept without cramps or fever for the first time in months. Afterward, she lay wrapped around him naked and sated, but with a flicker of darkness dancing at the edge of her thoughts. "What were they like?" she asked. Des nuzzled her neck. "The Tavalis are what everyone says they are. Ruthless and twisted. But it's strange, Blue." He lay back and threw an arm over his eyes. "They take such good care of each other. And when one of them dies, they mourn unlike anything I've ever seen." She rested her chin on his chest to look up at him. "Wow, I didn't expect you to come back with stories of love." She'd lost hope he'd come back at all. "Me either. I think that's why the old man decided to let me go a few months back." Daz squeezed her hip. The dark flicker at the edge of Jules's awareness solidified. "I met the old man, Tavali. I've never met anyone like him. When he's sitting still, so much power radiates from him, you pause before every step you take. Yet, he loved the son and grandsons he lost, and I think he loved me little, because my mother ran away and they never found her." "And your father?" Jules asked, stroking his hair the way she used to before he'd left her. Daz blew out a heavy exhale. "An unknown quantity," he said. Jules lay with him for a while longer. "How do you feel about that?" "Same way I did before." Daz played with the swath of blue in her hair. "I can live with it." Beneath the sheet covering them, Jules tapped her left foot. "But they let you go a few months ago." He nodded. "The old man said I looked like my mother, and he could neither take the death of another son nor lose her again through me." A glint of wonder entered his gaze. "He's pondering allowing a part of the family to go legit. Good night, Dashiell. Let's talk more in the morning." "Okay," Jules said. Hands balled into fists. The darkness she'd only glimpsed before boiled just below her surface. "Okay," he said, kissing her with such tenderness it cut. From the moment they stepped down off the staircase the next morning, Averdeens and Westlakes and Warrens and Riordans descended on them. Dylan shot Daz a cold-blooded glower before he took Jules's hand to lead her to the couch. "I need to give you a check-up," he said. "Lennox said you experienced a pretty wild recovery." The touch of Dylan's skin against hers didn't feel right. Jules gently pulled away. Dylan didn't notice. He sat her down on the couch, snapped on a pair of gloves and examined her. "You're not cramping anymore?" He stuck a thermometer in her ear. "No." "Wait. What?" Daz walked over to crouch down beside Dylan. "What's wrong with her?" "I'm starting to think it's you," Dylan answered. Cash grabbed Daz by the shoulder and whipped him around. "We called you. Mom. Dad. We thought you were dead. We didn't know if they'd buried you somewhere in the bayou." Cash turned red. Jules had never seen him so angry. Yet he had every right to be. Now that the instant healing and sexual hunger had worn off, her anger had started to bubble up too. The acid of Daz's disregard for their feelings burned the back of her throat. Anger brought hot tears to Cash's eyes. Do you know what it's like to think your brother is dead? His hands fisted and unfisted. Finally Cash shoved his hands through his short hair. Can you even? It was like somebody cut out a chunk of me. Daz grabbed his brother around the neck with one arm, patting Cash on the back with the other. I'm sorry, little brother, he said, holding on to Cash when he tried to break free. I didn't want the other Tavalis to find any of you through me. I couldn't take the risk of them pulling you into their mess. With a mighty jerk, Cash pulled away. That cousin of yours already knows how to find us. That's bad enough, but I made Turaj promise he'd never reveal details about any of you. Daz's mouth firmed into a grim line. He made a blood oath to me that he'd keep my confidence, and I trust him to do that. Cash slowly began to calm down. Daz grabbed his brother by the upper arm. I will never put any of the people I love in danger again. I don't care whether that danger comes from the outside world or inside me. I will protect you. Call Mom, Cash said. The front door slammed when he left the house. Daz started to chase after his brother when Jules cried out. Dylan tried to help her sit back on the couch, but she recoiled from him. The touch of his hand felt like needles stabbing into her skin. Running over to her, Daz got down on his knees, his hands kneading her thigh. What's wrong, Blue? I don't know, she said. There was a sharp needle-like pain when Dylan held my elbow. A flicker of worry flashed in Daz's eyes before he hid it. Are you feeling any pain now? He said, gesturing to his hand on her knee. No. What's going on? Gran said from the stairs. I heard Cash yelling. Cash and Daz had it out. But I seem to be cured, Jules said. Gran squeaked and came over to pat her cheek. Needles erupted through her skin on contact. Jules jerked away. Dylan snapped his rubber gloves back on. Lifting a finger, he said, Tell me if you feel any discomfort. He quickly tapped her skin. Nothing. Jules shook her head. This time he held the gloved finger against her forearm. Dull needles scraped her skin. It hurts, she said, but not like bare skin. Lennox, Daz beckoned. Come over here and touch Jules, please. He sounded worried, and it scared Jules when her best friend touched her, and the same agony exploded across her skin. Lennox curled her fingers away. This isn't possible. Daz stood and began to pace. I did the research. No one has this condition. He growled low in his chest. It's not contagious. Gil transformed his posture. Dylan, did I do this to her? The doctor stood still for a moment. I've done the research too. I haven't found any cases of your condition. Has anyone else ever contracted it before? Not once. Des breathed out the words. Jules covered her mouth to keep from screaming. She couldn't live without touch. Even now she wanted to hug Lennox for comfort. Being touchy-feely was in her nature. Her family had raised her on hugs and kisses and hand-holding. A wave of anxiety so vicious it gave Jules the shakes thundered through her. She could not do this. Touch deprivation would slay her. Gran inclined her head to study Jules. Be quiet, boys. She shushed them. Our Juliana's not in a good place. Daz turned back to the couch and sat beside her, gently taking her by the nape. He kissed her forehead. No pain. Without thinking about it, Jules snatched away from him. Startled him. He looked wounded, but he didn't touch her again. You boys said you did your research? Gran asked. Her usual playfulness had been replaced with purpose. Both Daz and Dylan affirmed they'd searched for answers in many places. Well, Gran adjusted her purple sequin tracksuit. You weren't looking in the right book. She started toward the stairs. When no one made a move to follow her, she said, Come on, it's time for us to go into the attic. Chapter 27. Gran led them up to the third floor to a door in the middle of the hallway. Once they'd gone through, they found another flight of rough wooden steps. Gran led the way, with Garrett holding her hand to keep her steady. At the top they found a large room shaped roughly like half an octagon. The exposed wooden structure of the house gave the room character, as did the warm reds of the Persian rug in the center, and antique furniture. In the middle of the rug stood an ornate mahogany podium. They each walked around it to find a massive 4 or 5 inch thick leather-bound tome on the stand. A ring of silver glyphs was stamped into the dark green, nearly black leather. Gran, how'd you get all this stuff up here? I don't remember buying any of this, Garrett asked. Oh. Gran waved him off. Lennox bought it all at thrift shops. She loves thrifting. Why not? Garrett folded his arms over his chest. I'm clueless about a lot of things in my household. Daz watched Garrett's posture. Alpha male to alpha male something or someone had made the big werewolf unhappy, and Daz wouldn't be surprised if Garrett erupted soon. To change the subject, he activated his smartassery. Also, why does every grandma resort to going to the attic? It's pretty much a law of the universe, Lennox said. Do you think that's why hip breakage is so common? Daz asked. Jules giggled. And he felt better about the tension between them. He needed a private moment to talk to her to try and figure things out. Shush, Gran said, lifting the book in a surprising show of strength. I give you the big book of words. You've got to be kidding, Garrett said dryly. This is the best secret ever, Gran. Knox yelled out. Gran smiled at her great-grandson but threw an unlit candle at Garrett's head. He ducked. Easy, Grandma. He said the last like an insult. Gran stuck out her tongue at him. First of all, Garrett continued, why didn't the book burn in the fire? The perplexed look on Gran's face said it all. Because it's the big book of words. Duh. It can't be burnt or shredded or otherwise destroyed. After a moment of biting his lip, Garrett called on his wife for help. Lennox. But Gran, where did it go when we were rebuilding the house? Lennox asked. Well, Lenny, it went where it goes when it's protecting itself. It's the big book of words. Makes sense to me, Knox said. I know, Gran replied. Even Daz's sense of mischief had reached its limit. Let's get down to it. How can the book help Jules? Oh yeah. Gran set the book down. We open it and see what it has to say about the situation. That's it. Daz stood beside her, peering over her thin frame at the book. Of course that's it, Dashiell. It always opens to the right page. Jules walked over to stand on the other side of Gran, checking for approval. She opened the book. The 2-page spread had a drawing of what looked like a wolverine on one side, with a smaller inset image of a honey badger beneath. Other than the drawings, glyphs similar to the ones on the cover spanned both pages. Wow, Jules said. It's really beautiful. I know some cosplayers who'd slay for this. How do we read it? You don't. Gran shrugged. Lenny, come over here. I didn't bring my glasses. Lennox joined them at the podium and looked askance at Jules. Why didn't you read it? How can I? It's covered in glyphs. It's not. It's in English. Wait. Gran, does our ability to read this book and the fact it's in our attic have anything to do with whatever kind of supernatural creature we are? The question received a frown from Gran. I suppose so. She waved a hand. Look, Lenny, it's cold up here. Read the book so we can go down and have apple cider. Wait, Gran. Lennox stopped their momentum again. If we had this book all along, why didn't we use it to help Daz? Gran shrugged again. I didn't know he had a shifter problem. I thought he was cursed. She looked around the room, stopping on Daz. What do I know about curses? Lennox closed her eyes and took several breaths for patience. Then she read from the book. In instances in which a wolverine, or less frequently a honey badger. A honey badger, Des said. That's the shifter in Jules's bloodline. That's what we've been smelling on her? Knox said. Honey badger. Duh, Gran said, shaking her head. Go on, Lenny. In instances in which a wolverine, or less frequently a honey badger, develops a condition in which the touch of all other beings becomes an agony upon them. It is known as the mating imperative, Lennox read. The wolverine in question will most assuredly be an alpha descendant of a mighty bloodline. Completing the mating dance is the only cure for the agony of touch brought on by the mating imperative. Daz interrupted. But we've had sex a bunch of times. It didn't cure me. Gran gave him another of her perplexed looks. Rather than answer, she turned to Jules. It's a good thing he's so pretty, and from all you're screaming at night, good with his hands too. Knox called out to Daz. Uncle Daz, when did you start having the touch problem? Everyone but Jules looked stunned by the affectionate Uncle Daz. Knox had used to address him. Daz didn't know whether to be happy with being accepted or to escape through the slatted attic window. I'm not sure, he answered. It amplified gradually, but around 5.5 years ago. Knox opened his tablet cover and pulled up an image. Bending to take a look. Daz got a second shock. One of the anti-fans posted that. Knox took the tablet and showed it to Jules. In the image, the entire crossband and a bunch of other people crowded in for the camera. Jules sat half on, half off Adam Cross's shoulders at what had to have been a hell of a New Year's Eve bash. On the right, one of her hands looked like she grabbed the nearest person to keep from falling. The closest person happened to be him, Daz. Everyone looked drunk off their asses. And perhaps the drink had erased the memory. Do you remember me from the party, Blue? She shook her head. No, I drank tequila that night and that's my kryptonite. That first touch is probably how you guys got into this mess, Knox said. Shrugging. Daz scratched his chin. It doesn't make sense. If I'd felt the same connection as when I first met Jules downstairs, I wouldn't have been able to leave her alone. Who says you met, or even saw each other? Gran said, giving Daz the side. You were a bunch of drunk idiots at a party. I don't think anyone truly connects when they're foobar wasted and seeing through a tequila haze. But, Daz tried to assert himself. If her umbrella had been anywhere nearby, Gran would have whacked him with it. You're not even acknowledging each other here. You're looking over there. Gran pointed southwest. And she's looking at her rockstar. Ah, Lennox said. I bet it was incidental contact. But I guess that's all it took to light a spark. That's a hell of a slow burner. Garrett rubbed his wife's lower back. Lennox winked up at him. Some relationships need a catalyst to ignite. A pensive look overtook Jules's features as she tugged on her ear. Why didn't you show us this sooner, Knox? She hooked the boy by the neck. I was saving it for the storyteller's game we play with all our old pics. The boy said in one of his moments of backward logic. You guys were so drunk I knew you wouldn't remember what happened. I'd win a point in the bet for being the first to request the story behind the photo. When he received open-mouthed glowers in return, Knox shrugged again. I like to win. Good strategy, grandson. Gran and the boy exchanged fist bumps. Likely because he commiserated with Daz's sudden need to kick Knox in the ass. Garrett answered his question about why mating with Jules hadn't cured him. The book isn't talking about the act of mating. It means the state of being mated. Knox moved closer to his father. Like you and Mom, Dad? A deep sadness overtook Garrett's features. He shook his head. No, Lennox, and I aren't mated. What? Lennox rested her hand on Garrett's arm. What do you mean we're not mated? We're one. Garrett took her by the shoulders. You're married to the man, Elle. But you've rejected the wolf. He remains alone, unmated. Lennox laid a hand over his heart. Garrett, I had no idea, she said. Does it hurt you? What do you think? He snarled, but brought himself quickly under control. He raised his hands. We're not talking about this here. Let's take care of Jules first. Okay, Lennox whispered quietly. Daz worried for the two people who'd become his friends. Lennox had no idea what she'd done and how wrong it could go if she didn't fix it. But Daz had his own woman to worry about. Turning to her, he laid the palm of his hand on the crown of her head. His goddess was his. Things had finally worked out in his favor. You hear that, Blue? Problem solved. We'll be one for life. The woman he loved gripped his wrist and wrenched his hand away from her head. Our problems are not over, Dashiell. I'm cursed to touch only you. You're cursed to touch only me. I don't want that. I won't accept a life forced on me by circumstance. He didn't believe he'd heard her correctly. Daz reached for her and she moved away. Blue, please. I can't live without you. Jules paused, the rise and fall of her chest fast but steady. You survived. For 7 months, Dashiell. You'll survive again. She paused as though measuring her words. I can't mate with you now. I can't even stand the sight of you right now. Daz steeled himself against the rush of pain more intense than any reaction to his touch aversion. If he hadn't been trained to stay on his feet, he wouldn't have been able to remain standing. She hadn't finished yet. Garrett, I invoke a request for the protection of the Lupin's wolfen pack. No, Blue. Don't, Daz pleaded with her. Are you sure, Juliana? Garrett asked. She nodded. Garrett echoed her. Then, you are protected. Good, Jules said, her voice breaking with unshed tears. Keep Dashiell Warren away from me. She left them all in the attic. This time Daz couldn't prevent it. He fell to his knees. Chapter 28. Why is my brother being kicked out of the house and separated from his mate? Cash followed Garrett from the backyard into the house and through the kitchen. Daz moved silently behind them, hoping they could figure out a way to keep him in the house so he could woo his woman back. Garrett gritted his teeth, because she's not his mate, and Jules invoked a request for protection from him. She's family. I'm going to protect her. With an uncharacteristic show of temper, Cash punched a hole through the subway tile. Garrett didn't even flinch. I'm family, Cash said. That makes my brother family. Then help him work this shit out, Garrett roared. Watching the two best friends fight over him made Daz sick. These two never argued. They tag-teamed people in business meetings, made fun of each other relentlessly, even played pranks on each other, but they didn't argue. The two men had become closer than brothers. Once again Daz's presence broke things apart. Stop, Daz said, holding up 2 fingers and a thumb in his habit of taking command of a situation. You and Garrett aren't the problem here. I am, and I'll find a way to fix it on my own. That said, Daz went up to his room, packed his duffel, and headed for the front door. When he got there, Cash's bags were packed and waiting. His brother came down the stairs behind him. I was just saying goodbye, Cash said. Daz opened his mouth, but Cash silenced him. I'm with you. This time you don't get to say no. Daz relented and smiled. Cash echoed him. Plus, I hooked us up with a great place to stay. Where's that? The brothers walked out the door together. Garrett's place. It's about 20 minutes away. 8 months later, Daz and Garrett fell into a daily ritual. Daz would go over to Aberdeen Manor and do everything in his power to get into the house, short of beating the shit out of somebody. He wasn't sure he could beat Garrett, but when Garrett went away on business, Dylan and several members of the Lupin's wolf pack watched the house. When the wolves couldn't do it, the sheriff's wild boars or deputy bear took over. What had brought a polar bear to a small North Carolina town didn't concern Daz. The fact that he couldn't get around the polar bears' gigantic ass did. Other than Garrett, Daz knew he could take the rest of them. What he couldn't take would be Jules's response to him hurting her friends. He couldn't hurt her by hurting them, so he played nice and waited Jules, Garrett, and all the other shifters out. On this particularly lovely August afternoon, Garrett waited for Daz on the front porch with 2 beers fresh out of the cooler. Daz ambled up and sat down beside his buddy, stretching his legs out in front of him. Daz picked up Garrett's beer and popped the cap with his fangs. He did the same to his own beer. How's she doing? He asked. Garrett clinked his beer to Daz's. She's all right. I seem to be the only one getting tired of this standoff. You and me both. They raised eyebrows at each other and took swigs off their beers. How the fuck is she getting around when she goes out? I haven't seen her once in these last few months. A long exhale before Garrett said, those women keep me in the dark about a lot of things. I'm about at my limit with that too. A pause. I know Jules told you whatever it is that Lennox is keeping from me. How do you know that? Unlike my L, Jules tells you everything. Garrett's eyes widened and he amended. Told you everything. He shook his head. Shit, Daz. I'm sorry. No worries, Daz said. The messed up part is she won't let me explain why I left. I thought she understood, but it's clear she doesn't. That's the thing, when your mate isn't a shifter or has so little shifter blood it doesn't factor in like Jules and her honey badger heritage. She doesn't quite get how the animal works, that it has its own needs. Garrett understood Daz better than his brother did. Cash didn't have a woman so deeply ingrained in his system that he literally breathed her. Cash kept telling him he'd live. Daz didn't think so. He studied the wolf. Daz wanted to help the guy out, especially since neither of them were able to fix things for themselves at the moment. Garrett deserved to know the size and shape of the rift that had grown between him and his wife. But Daz couldn't betray Jules's trust, and he wouldn't risk widening the divide between him and his woman by getting involved in Garrett and Lennox's troubles. On a second sidelong glance, Daz decided he might be able to help another way. You some kind of dire wolf, Garrett? The wolf laughed. You and Jules watch way too much fantasy. I'm older and bigger than that. Daz couldn't help but chuckle. He missed his geek girl. He hadn't watched a single anime without her. Back to the conversation at hand, he said. I ask because you know I don't fight anymore, right? Garrett nodded and Daz said, I've caused a lot of damage to a lot of people over the years. I can't go Back to the fight game. I miss it, but I don't want to hurt anyone. You know what I'm saying. I can relate, Garrett said, his gaze on the street as Dylan's car rode by. With a honk of the horn. I know you can, but do you get what I'm saying? Daz stressed the imperative word. Garrett looked at him hard. It's extremely difficult to hurt someone. Like you just said. Killing you isn't within my capability. A smile lit Garrett's hardline face. That's very true. He took another swig of beer. So to borrow a phrase from my favorite animated series, Daz paused for effect, you can take it. Can't you, big man? Garrett leapt to his feet. Excitement made his eyes flicker amber. How do you want to do this? Daz scratched his beard. I don't know. Let me see your wolf first. Amber blazed across Garrett's eyes. He glanced around, making sure no one watched them. Noting they were in the clear, Garrett stripped. Then his body shimmered, stretched, and kept stretching. After a full shift, a prehistoric wolf stood in front of Daz. Daz blinked a few times. Hey buddy, he said. How do you feel about fangs, fists, claws? No full shifts. The wolf laughed as it transformed back into a man. Daz barely let Garrett get his clothes on before he punched him in the head. And it was on. The werewolf and the wolverine brawled through the woods, across Staunton Bridge, and all the way through town. Dylan put a call out to all his fellow fight lovers, and bets were placed. Some people bet on the stronger bloodline, and therefore Garrett would win out. Others bet on skills and picked Daz to take the win. If they'd only known neither man had any intentions of taking victory, they fought because they'd finally found someone they could cut loose with and not have to worry about the consequences. With Daz, Garrett could release his wolf from his cage and let him flex his muscles. With Garrett, Daz allowed himself to lose control with no guilt about the damage he might do. They fought for hours with a huge crowd of townsfolk cheering them on. Around 9 p.m. they stopped, mostly because neither of them could lift their arms. Also because they'd reached a local bar with a half-price beer sign in the window. Garrett threw his arm around Daz's neck and looked slightly perplexed. When the wolverine didn't flinch away. I'm going to do everything I can to help you. Garrett swayed and threw a fist in the air. And since we're both punch drunk, we might as well get shit faced. Beers on me. The crowd cheered. A wave of them swept Garrett and Daz into the bar, where they got drunk together for the first time and firmly sealed their friendship. At approximately 13 minutes after 3 a.m., Dashiell, Warren, and Garrett Westlake rolled themselves out of a big black food truck with the words Cinema Bites painted across one side, and staggered onto the front lawn of Aberdeen Manor. The food truck's owner, a beautifully curvy woman of Arabic descent named Mala, gave them 2 thumbs up and reached through the window to pat the movie screen mounted to the opposite side of her vehicle. I'm ready. When you guys are, she said, repositioning her glasses and smiling. She glanced at Daz. Garrett's movie locations keep me in business, and it's fun showing movies to filmmakers while keeping them fed. Anytime he needs a favor, I'm here for him. Garrett gave her a drunken thumb sideways and turned to face the manor. Woman of the house, he bellowed. Woman of the house, get out here. A window blew open. Garrett, hush, Lennox said. Listen up, Lennox Unjuli Aberdeen. This man wants to see his woman and we're going to help him. Daz noted Garrett's skills. Most drunk men didn't articulate this well. Sure, Garrett. Jules is sleeping and so is Gran. I'm not asleep anymore, Lennox. Jules's outline appeared in another window. Her face draped in shadow. Start it up, Mala, Garrett said. Mala flipped a switch inside her food truck, and a light flickered across the screen on the outside of it. A girl with long copper braids appeared on video. I'm Octavia, she said. And I'm a dazzler who totally digs Daz and Jules. She paused. Hey Jules, if you ever have another problem with anti-fans and I'm around, I've got your back. A guy with hot pink hair and lots of tattoos appeared next. I'm Ben, I'm a dazzler, and I want to buy Daz a beer for getting a woman like Jules. If Daz ever messes up, message me, girl. The videos kept coming, more and more images of fans who wanted Jules to know they supported her relationship with Daz. Then the screen divided into 4 dazzlers with kind words for Daz and Jules. Then 8. Then 16, 30. 2 and on until there were too many to count. Daz glanced upward at the window where Jules quietly watched. He knew the video was beautiful. He didn't need to be told that. His subscribers had done good work, and he'd worked hard not to cry while editing it. Of course he Hadn't been sure if he'd get the chance to show Jules the video, but Garrett was very persuasive when he was drunk. Or maybe Daz was easily persuaded when drunk. Either way, Daz hoped he and his subscribers' efforts would be enough to convince Jules to come back to him. As he waited, even in the dim light, he saw a glistening trail of tears on his woman's face. Daz took that as his cue. I want to be your mate, Blue. I'm sure I'm the man you need now. I'll put my everything on that. Tears made her voice crack when Jules said, Not yet, Dashiell. I need more time. Give me a little more time. Without another word, she disappeared into the darkness of the house. Daz reached for her, but he stood too far away. Garrett, who still had his arm wrapped around Daz's neck, swayed, and since Daz wasn't too steady on his own feet, he swayed with him. He and the big wolf found their shared balance, and Daz said, It doesn't have to be tonight, Blue. I'll wait for you. A huge clawed hand slashed through the air. But tonight would be nice. Though, Garrett yelled out. It'd be real nice, Daz repeated. Lennox's left eye got all twitchy, and Daz feared for both his and the wolf's life. She said, Not yet. She needs more time, so let's all go to bed and leave it for another night. You can tell him to wait all you want, Lenny, but he considers her his and he's not going to stop until he sees her. Garrett sat down and took Daz with him. I wouldn't let anyone stop me from getting to you. Hold on. Lennox closed the window and opened the door a few seconds later. She wore a pinstriped men's dress shirt with an ink stain on it, and she had perfect legs. Perfect, like could be insured for millions of dollars legs. Daz gave Garrett 2 thumbs up. Garrett elbowed him in the face. Lennox came to stand in front of them. Daz, are you sure you're just not obsessed with Jules because she's the only woman you can touch? Daz glanced down at the huge wolf arm, now crushing his windpipe, fighting for breath. Daz nodded once, hard and fast. So if I tell you she's fine, will you take my word for it? Daz growled and ran his claws across Garrett's arm. The wolf howled but let him go. Hell no, he answered the question. Garrett moved between them and snarled. Easy. Daz leashed a bit of his annoyance. No, Lennox. I won't take your word for I need to see her. Lennox stepped around Garrett. What if Cash told you she's all right? I'd believe him, but I'd still need to see for myself. You won't take anyone's word for it, will you? No, Daz nearly growled but checked himself. He liked Lennox, damn it. She was an amazing mom and an equally wonderful friend. If he ever had to trust someone to watch Jules's back, it'd be Lennox or his brother. Of course Garrett came with that package. He didn't mean to growl at her. It was just how much she reminded him of his foster mother, and the fact he wasn't good enough to keep. He forced himself to relax and explained the best he could. I need to see her. I need to touch her and make sure for myself that she's okay. Then you don't need my help, Lennox said with a brilliant smile. Go home. Daz, you don't have to wait much longer. Daz smiled back at her. If Lennox said to wait a little longer, he'd wait. Stopping in front of her husband, Lennox held out her hand. Come, drunk man. Let's go to bed. Garrett ignored her outstretched hand and stood up on his own. While they watched, he shook off the drunken posture he'd worn only a moment before. No, Garrett said. I'm going to stay over at my place. Why? Trust me, Daz doesn't need our help. The laugh Garrett huffed out had no trace of humor in it. Trust you? He looked at the stars, his shoulders tense with the effort of controlling his anger. You want me to trust the woman who says she wants my baby but takes birth control? Lennox covered her mouth. No, Garrett. Her heartbeat pounded so hard it echoed within Daz's shifter hearing. Garrett's brow rose. Oh, or maybe you want me to trust the woman who only wants half of me and is happy to throw the rest away. No, Garrett. Lennox grabbed the front of his shirt. He took her wrists and gave them back to her. His rejection caused hurt to darken her eyes. I'm just so afraid, she whispered. I know that, Elle. Garrett seemed to relent for a moment. But how long do you want your fears to be my hell? She didn't have an answer. Daz saw it on her face. Garrett gestured they should get going with a jerk of his head from Daz to the street and turned away from his wife. He looked at Lennox over his shoulder. If Garrett's last words haunted Daz, they must have broken her. You come find me when my wolf can rest his head in your lap the same as I do. Maybe then you'll be ready to be my wife and my mate. Until then, you're neither.